Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, thumma amma ba'd. To proceed, inshallah, today we have the chapter on as-sahw or sobriety, and later, inshallah, in the fiqh session we will talk about the chapter on breastfeeding or bab al-rada'. First, the chapter on as-sahw or the station of as-sahw, sobriety. Imam al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala said in his book Manaazil As-Saa'ireen, station number 88 or chapter number 88, sobriety. We have two more chapters and we will finish the section of realities. That's attachment and detachment, and then al-infisal and al-ittisal, and then or al-ittisal and al-infisal, and then we will start the section on the endings, the section on nihayat or the endings, which will start with al-ma'rifah, recognition, and end with at-tawheed, monotheism. And then the Shaykh here started by an ayah, like usual. He said, قال الله عز وجل حتى إذا فزع عن قلوبهم قالوا ماذا قال ربكم قالوا الحق. Allah the Almighty said, until when terror is removed from their hearts, they will say to one another, what has your Lord said? They will say the truth. So what is the relationship between this ayah and sahw? حتى إذا فزع عن قلوبهم, until terror has been removed from their hearts. And when the angels hear the sound of the Lord, the intensity of the experience makes them startled, shocked, and then it's just like when the Prophet ﷺ used to get the revelation, it used to be hard on him, and then he would almost wake up from it, from the intense experience of the revelation. And the same applies here. So this is sahw ba'da sukr, this is sobriety after intoxication. And here the angels had the sort of the shock removed from them, or the terror removed from their hearts, and they became sort of sober. Then the Shaykh said, الصحو فوق السكر وهو يناسب مقام البسط والصحو مقام صاعد عن الانتظار مغن عن الطلب طاهر من الحرج. Sahw is above sukr or intoxication, and it suits the station of bust or expansion. Sahw is a station that is clear of delay and suffices from any pursuit and is purified from any culpability. Haraj, culpability. Haraj could be translated sometimes as hardship, but here it means culpability. So what does that mean? Well, sahw is the opposite of sukr. Sukr is when someone goes through an intense spiritual experience after much spiritual labor, much spiritual labor, and that is not limited to ritualism, and that is not limited to repeating the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is also purifying the hearts. And after being tested, one test after another, in your devotion to Allah, in your rahmat al-khalq and mercy towards His creation, and devotion towards Him, and so on, and after much spiritual labor, you get some intense spiritual imports like waridat that will overwhelm some people who are not established enough in their spiritual stations and cause them that intoxication. This intoxication is different from the intoxication of ignorance, from the intoxication of pretension, from the intoxication of lust, from the intoxication of greed. These are people who are still law-abiding, Sharia compliant, law-abiding. These are people who are still maintaining the fara'id. These are people who still stay within the bounds of Allah and never transgress His bounds. يَتَعَدَّوْنَ حُدُودَهُ. Whatever in late iterations of Sufism that deviated from this, that is their own deviation. That is not the deviation of the early masters of the path. That is not the deviation of the true masters of the path. That is deviation of some groups. No matter how prevalent the deviation has become, look at Muslims and how far they deviated from the way of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. Would that taint the name of Islam itself? It should not. Although it does affect it perceptually in the perception of the onlookers or the outsiders, but it should not affect the Islam itself ontologically. It does not affect the religion itself perceptually in the minds of people. It may. The same should apply here as well. Whatever deviations that happened, and they have become prevalent in many turuq or sort of organized Sufism. Within organized Sufism, certainly certain flaws prevailed, but that should not basically mean that Sufism in itself, the way it was practiced by the early and the true masters of the path, is responsible for such deviations. We have to call out the deviations and preserve the pure legacy. So don't throw the baby with the bathwater. So the sukr that we're talking about is basically intense spiritual imports that cause people to become overwhelmed. They may not become they may lose sensation of themselves and their body and so on. They will continue, and briefly they may be overwhelmed to the point of making those esoteric statements as we said before. But they come back quickly and correct themselves. So that's the sukr that is considered to be a station, not a necessary station, not a necessary bridge to sah, but aspects of it are necessary, just like we talked about fana and baqa, and we said that aspects of fana are necessary for people to reach baqa, subsisted by Allah, for Allah, with Allah. But it's not necessary because the companions have maintained their sobriety throughout their lives because of their establishment, their tamakkun in their spiritual stations. But it may be a station that some of the salihin will go through, some of the righteous people will go through, and then they cross from this station to sahwa, and that is why the Shaykh put sahwa after sukr, because he goes from the lower to the higher. So he intentionally made sahwa come after sukr to tell you that sukr is intended to lead you to to this state of sobriety, this state of alertness. And we'll talk more about the difference between them. So he says here about sahwa is a station that is clear of delay, sa'idun an al-intizar, because he considered the sahwa to be he considers that there is a relationship between sahwa and hudur and presence. And when you are in the divine presence, you are not waiting for anything because you reached your destination. There is not anything to wait for. So that's what he means by sa'id an al-intizar. Mughnin an al-talab is clear or suffices from any pursuit, which does not mean that your pursuit of Allah's pleasure will stop at one point, your spiritual labor will stop at one point, your juhd, your effort that you put into the worship of Allah and the service of Allah would ever stop at one point. But when you reach your destination, you become mahmul, like you're carried, not hamil. You're not burdened, you're being carried. So the pursuits become effortless. And that's what this means. مغن عن الطلب طاهر من الحرج. طاهر من الحرج is purified from any culpability of the station of sukr, because the station of sukr may cause people some haraj or culpability, because it may be an overwhelm, it may go through these experiences that overwhelm them, and they may err, may make mistakes. But this is sahw, this is basically sobriety, this is alertness. They're not making mistakes. They are free of culpability. Then the Shaykh said, فَإِنَّ السُّكْرَ إِنَّمَا هُوَ فِي الْحَقِّ وَالصَّحْوُ إِنَّمَا هُوَ بِالْحَقِّ. For sukr, intoxication is being intoxicated with the real, fil haqq, because of the real, because of your vision of the majesty and beauty of the real, subhanahu wa ta'ala. You become intoxicated, you cannot handle it, it overwhelms you. And as we said, it did not overwhelm the Sahaba because of their tamakkun, their establishment in their spiritual stations. But it may overwhelm people who are not as established as the Sahaba, when they have this absorption into the focus of their attention, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You sit down and say La ilaha illallah, particularly if you say, for instance, Allah, 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 without the full equation, without the full mu'adala that the Prophet ﷺ taught us, La ilaha illallah. This may result in the vanishment of your shuhud, or your perception of the world around you, because the focus of the attention, Allah, 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 with a focus of attention on the divine subhanahu wa ta'ala, may make you reach a point where you lose perception of the self and the surroundings. Is this a superior station? No, it is not. Al-Baqa is superior station, to be aware of the surroundings. That read the history of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, the sayar of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. They were completely aware of their surroundings, completely aware of the self, which did not detract from their devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their connectedness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Never did it, but they were still completely aware. But when you do this, and you become absorbed into the focus of your attention, and then the intensity of the experience and the intensity of the vision of the majesty and the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may overwhelm you. You become intoxicated. فَإِنَّ السُّكْرَ إِنَّمَا هُوَ فِي الْحَقِّ وَالصَّحْوُ إِنَّمَا هُوَ بِالْحَقِّ. For intoxication is being intoxicated with the real, and sahw is being sober by the real. Now, كنت سمعه الذي يسمع به وبصره الذي يبصر به ويده التي يبطش بها ورجله التي يمشي بها ولئن سأل إلى آخر الحديث. So now I become his hearing with which he hears, his sight with which he sees, and his hand with which he strikes, his leg with which he walks. And if you subsist by Allah, he is you're hearing with what you hear. Can you become overwhelmed by the vision of the majesty? No, you don't become overwhelmed, because you are subsisting by him after you had already been stripped from your ego, and you are subsisting by him, for him, with him alone. You do not become overwhelmed by the intense spiritual experience after much spiritual labor. You are still mutamakkin, you're still established, and you have full recognition of your surroundings and full devotion to your Lord. So that is why sahw is better than sukr. And the definition of a Shaykh, sahw is better than sukr. Sahw is where the Prophet ﷺ and his companions belonged, so it has to be better than a sukr. It is an indication of tamakkun, and it is an indication that now you're not overwhelmed, not because you're not having intense spiritual experiences, because most of us are not overwhelmed simply because we don't have intense spiritual experiences. So it's not like we are in a state of sahw. We may be in a state of heedlessness, and we've not experienced any of that to begin with. But the difference is that for the companions, they did have the extremely intense spiritual experiences. There was much spiritual labor involved, and they had their intense spiritual experiences. They were not overwhelmed because of their tamakkun, their establishment, their spiritual strength, and because they are subsisting by Allah, with Allah, for Allah, so they are not expected to be overwhelmed by any vision of the majesty or the glory or the beauty. Then the Shaykh said, وَكُلُّ مَا كَانَ فِي عَيْنِ الْحَقِّ لَمْ يَخْلُ مِنْ حَيْرَةٍ لَا حَيْرَةَ الشُّبْهَةِ بَلْ حَيْرَةُ مُشَاهَدَةِ نُورِ الْعِزَّةِ. Then he said, and that which is exposed to the vision of the real is not free of bewilderment, not the bewilderment of misgivings, but that of beholding the light of the might, the light of His might, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's just telling you that it is certainly, particularly, if people make a quick shift from a life of heedlessness into a life of observation and spiritual labor, they can become quickly overwhelmed. And that's the bewilderment, not the bewilderment of misgivings, but the bewilderment of beholding the lights of His might. وَمَا كَانَ بِالْحَقِّ لَمْ يَخْلُ مِنْ صَحَّةٍ وَلَمْ يُخَفْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ نَقِيصَةٍ وَلَمْ تَتَعَاوَرْهُ عِلَّةٍ. As for that which is by the real, بالحق, now subsistence by Allah, with Allah, for Allah, as for that which is by the real, it is rectified, free of deficiency, and is not subject to any flaws. It is rectified, it's free of deficiency, and it is not subject to any flaws. So there is no culpability, there is no haraj, because you are always observant not only of Allah but of His demands, and you are aware of the self, which is important, that you are not basically enslaved to the self but aware of it, and you are aware of the surroundings, not distracted by the surroundings but aware of them, and your whole devotion is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you look at the history of the Sahaba, the seerah of the Sahaba, for instance, you look at Umar radiallahu anhu, how he relates to us that he sometimes prepares the army in his salah. So his salah is the peak of your spiritual experience with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're standing before Allah, but he's aware of all of his obligations, all of Allah's demands, that even in salah, he is preparing the army. And certainly that would not entail sort of like branching off and just like forgetting about your salah. But because of his extreme awareness of his responsibility as commander of the believers, then the thoughts, he cannot fight the thoughts, they come to him, and he may think, I will designate Khalid as the leader, or Abu Ubaidah as the leader, or something quickly like this, and goes back to his salah. It's not like he's just like branching off, and no. But this is awareness of your responsibilities, awareness of your surroundings. And this is Umar, this is al-Faruq. Who's going to reach his status, other than his two companions, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And certainly that's not to compare between the Prophet ﷺ and anyone else, but that is just the usual lingo. They were always together, but the separate levels are completely kept in mind. So if you think also of the Prophet ﷺ, salah, and we're talking about salah in particular, because salah should be, when you are facing Ar-Rahman and conversing with Ar-Rahman, and Ar-Rahman is looking at you, as long as you don't look away, the Ar-Rahman will be looking at you, and So that this would be the peak of your sort of spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in your salah. And if you think, if you remember the hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after Salat al-Asr ran to some of Buyut Azwajihi, the dwellings of his wives, and the Sahaba were startled by his urgency, by his sort of the urgency of his movement. And then he came out to them and he said that I remember that I have gold and I hated فَكَرِهْتُ أَنْ يَحْبِسَنِي. كَرِهْتُ أَنْ يَحْبِسَني could be I hated that it would divert me from worship or concentration or something of that nature, or كَرِهْتُ أَنْ يَحْبِسَني, as Ibn Battal said rahimahullah ta'ala, that I was afraid that it may keep me behind on the Day of Judgment, that I will be culpable, responsible, liable for not distributing the gold immediately that we received. So this again is sahwa, this is sobriety, knowing what the demands of the divine are and observing them and complying with them, even in the midst of your sort of spiritual connection with Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, if you are in the presence of a king, and we've repeated this several times, you could always be amused by the glory and the majesty and so on, and distracted from the service of the king by your amusement. Or you could handle your amusement and be committed to the service of the king. So you are observant of every demand of the king, not every demand, every gesture of the king as well. Finally, the Shaykh said, وَالصَّحْوُ مِنْ مَنَازِلِ الْحَيَاةِ وَأَوْدِيَةِ الْجَمْعِ وَلَوَائِحِ الْوُجُودِ. Sahwa is one of the stations of life, the valleys of union, and the displays of actuality. Sahwa is one of the stations of life, and we talked about life. Station 84 was life, and we will talk about actuality, station of wujud, which is coming, and it's, I think, station 96. And the valleys of union, and we've talked about union, and we have said that the Sunni union is when your iradat, your wills, are in complete unison or conformity with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it with the station of Sahwa. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. We will have a very long chapter to finish, so inshallah we'll take 7 minutes and come back so that we can finish this chapter. So before the winter break we would have finished up to breastfeeding.